going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the 2023 Horse Management Seminar Series. And yes, this is our third year that we are doing a virtual webinar series. And I am actually thrilled that we decided to keep it virtual. I don't know who has heard me mention, but we have over 1,200 people registered, which is an absolute record. So we'll see how many people actually do log on, but the numbers are steadily climbing as I watch the participant numbers go up. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background before we actually start with our speakers. First, for myself, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Carrie Williams. I'm the Equine Extension Specialist here at Rutgers University and have been here, actually in July will be my 20th year. So I have done a lot of equine programming for people in the state, also in the region, and I've also given a lot of national talks. I am thrilled that this seminar has gone international. We usually get a lot of international attendees as well. So if you are one of them, thank you for joining us and welcome. I'm also really excited to say that the Equine Science Center has been hugely critical to making this a success. Our horse management seminar coordinator, who helps me out a lot, is Kyle Hartman. He is in the background for me, helping anybody who might have any issues or problems. You can go ahead and send a text or a chat, which is down at the bottom, and he will help you out if you're having any technical issues. I'm going to say now, though, do not ask any questions in chat. We will not be monitoring the chat for any program questions. You are going to ask those by going down to the bottom, and right next to the chat, you're going to see a Q&A button. So in that Q&A button is where you're going to ask your questions to the seminar speakers. Today, we're going to go through all of the three speakers. They're going to do all of their information, and then we're going to open it up to questions because I think some of the things are going to overlap. So when we're all ready to go, I'll explain that again for those of you who might have missed that background. But I'm going to go ahead and just give a little more information about the Equine Science Center now. The Equine Science Center is a virtual center here at Rutgers who deals a lot with education, not just for the horse owning public, but also youth and students. So I'm just going to share a little video here with everybody about the Equine Science Center. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing and reshare and make sure that my sound is all optimized and ready to be shared. Ooh.
Good morning. Welcome to the George H. Cook campus, home of the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, the School of Environmental Biological Sciences, and of course, home to the Rutgers Equine Science Center. Equine Science Center is a soft-walled center where we bring together the best and the brightest to solve challenges impacting horses, horse well-being, and the horse industry. To provide you more details about the research being conducted at the Equine Science Center, and specifically the Equine Exercise Physiology Lab, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kenneth McKeever.
The lab was founded in 1995, and since then it's been one of the most productive research labs in the country, if not the world. We've conducted studies looking at how to care for the aged horse. That's a horse that's over 20. We've looked at various drugs that affect performance. We've even done studies for the Army looking at food extracts that can reduce inflammation. So the Equine Science Center and the Equine Exercise Physiology Lab are a valuable asset to how we care for horses in the state of New Jersey.
So we've all visited this morning the Equine Exercise Physiology Lab, part of the Equine Science Center at Rutgers. We have another facility where cutting-edge research is being carried out, located on Riders Lane, and it is the site of the first of its kind environmental best management practices demonstration horse farm, located here on the George H. Cook campus. The team of scientists who are helping horse farmers become better environmental stewards and caretakers of the land is a team of multidisciplinary faculty, students, and staff led by Dr. Carrie Williams, Dr. Mike Westendorf, PhD student Jennifer Weinhardt, and other faculty, students, and staff from different departments here at Rutgers and beyond.
Hello, I'm Dr. Carrie Williams, the Equine Extension Specialist here at Rutgers University and the Associate Director of Extension for the Equine Science Center. We are here at the Environmental Best Management Practice Demonstration Horse Farm. This serves as a wonderful venue for the public, farm owners, other industry professionals to come look and see the 8 various best management practices, educational venues that they can use on their farm or in their areas. It is open to the public. You can come anytime. This venue also serves as a great location for research. My current graduate student, Jennifer Weinart, is looking at both cool season and some novel warm season grasses to see the production as well as the horse's metabolism. Some glucose and insulin responses as well as the microbiome will be looked at over the next 2 years of this project. Thank you for visiting all of us at the Equine Science Center. Our website can be found at esc.rutgers.edu.
So that was just a short video to give everybody some information as to what the Equine Science Center is. They really have helped out a lot with making these webinars happen. So they are free to everybody around the world. And in order to make that happen, it does take money on the back end. So if any of you are interested in helping us create these programs more often, we would really appreciate if you give back to the Equine Science Center. So please consider going to the esc.rutgers.edu/donate website. And any amount of money is always appreciated to help us continue these programs. So with that being said, there's a few others I want to thank. Something that we just recently got, which I'm really excited about, and some of you might not know this, Triple Crown, actually, Triple Crown Nutrition, one of our area specialists, has been a huge supporter of our programs, especially when they're live. They always send support. So the Triple Crown rep has donated some door prizes. So every evening, what we're going to do is at the very end, we're going to randomly select from one of the current list of participants that is live on the webinar. And I will send their email to Kelly Payne. She is the representative at Triple Crown that is donating these door prizes. And you'll be able to pick from a range of door prizes. These door prizes are pretty awesome. I actually wish that I could be able to get a door prize. So I guarantee you'll want to stay on because you need to be live and you need to basically give us a thumbs up or say that you're there in order to receive the door prize. But that'll be done at the end of the webinar series. So before I introduce the speakers, I want to find out a little bit about who everybody else is. So we're going to take just a little bit and we're going to go on and do a little thing that I'm trying to get open right now. Give me 1 minute to share my screen. And there we go. We're going to do what's called Menti. So if everyone will do me a favor, go on to whatever phone or open another browser or whatever you would like and go to menti.com. So menti.com. And you see the instructions here at the top. You go to menti.com and then you can type in this code 13308239. And I'm going to copy the link and I'm going to post it. I'm not able to post it because I don't think you guys can see me. Oh, there we go. We've already got some people coming on. So that's great. Glad to know that we have it going. So I see, oh yeah, we're quickly going up. So I want to know where you guys are from. So what state, and if you're not in the state, please give me what country you are listening from. And we do this because I love to see the demographic from where everybody's coming from. And I see we already have 127 people on there. That's awesome. So we've got the bigger the word on the screen that you're seeing, means the more responses. And I love watching it change. And oh my goodness, it's changing so rapidly. But we see Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland are kind of the three biggest words. So that means they're actually the three most popular states where people are coming from. But I also see we have a big Canadian contingent, and I think I have a feeling I know why that is, which everybody will find out in just a minute. We've also got, and it's hard to watch them all change. I'm trying to see if we have international. I saw Portugal flash by me, and Saskatchewan, great. Where else? I see so Texas is coming up big too, and again, I wonder why that is. Oh man, they're changing so quickly. We have 240 people logged on now into the Menti, and we'll just give it a little bit as it's still changing. This is so much fun. So I'll get to download this when we're all done and everybody's filled this out. So we'll really get to see all of the states. My goal is to eventually have all 50 states present on the Menti, which is why I said don't abbreviate, because if you abbreviate PA, and we also have Pennsylvania, it doesn't get counted together. But it's really fun to see all the places. So we got Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, Ontario. So we got a lot of places in Canada represented, and that's great. I did see Brazil. Excellent. Welcome, Brazil. I'm trying to see quickly if there's any other international. Well, if I missed you, I apologize, because it's really hard to watch as it's changing so quickly. But I'm going to go to the next question because I want to see what everybody is involved in. So my next question was, what is your primary interaction with horses? And yeah, there's probably several things that you might be involved with, but are you an owner? Are you an enthusiast? You might not own a horse, but you might just love them, which is just fine. Are you a trainer? Or do you give lessons? Barn manager? Industry professional, meaning whether it's feed, tack, pharmaceutical? Are you a veterinarian? Or, I mean, there's a whole host of other things. And if you would like, go ahead in the chat. You can put, if you're other, what other thing do you do? I know in the past, a lot of times we get therapeutic riding, or maybe a PATH certified person. So I see a horse speak practitioner. How fun is that? That sounds fun. Equine science student. So yeah, if you're a student, that's great. I say therapeutic riding. Have a rehabilitation farm. That's great. Owner, rider, manager. So we see that horse owner is definitely by far the most popular one. But we also have a pretty equal split between the enthusiasts, the trainers, the managers, and other. We have a few veterinarians on and a few other participants as well. So that's excellent. I'm really happy to see that. This will be live, even though my screen won't be sharing. So I really encourage you, if you're just logging on, go to thementi.com and fill out your answers, because like I said, once we're all done, I go ahead and download these pretty little slides and pictures, and they're used in some of my reporting after this survey is done, where we can see what my demographic was in terms of location and in terms of what demographic you guys are. So thank you very much. Go ahead and stop sharing my screen now. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, because we want to get the show on the road. I've got 3 fantastic speakers that I'm really excited to invite, because they are the ones doing the research with the supplements that you want to hear about. And I will say part of today was a little bit personal, because supplements just so happen to be my favorite nutrition topic. And I strongly feel like we need more research on the supplements that are out there. So I figured, why not ask those that are doing the current research? So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Frank Andrews. He received his DVM degree from Washington State University, College of Veterinary Medicine. After a year in private practice in Walla Walla, Washington, he completed an equine internal medicine residency at the Ohio State University College of Veterinary Medicine. Dr. Andrews is a diplomat in the ACVIM, Large Animal Internal Medicine, and he was a faculty member at the University of Tennessee for 20 years before moving to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Dr. Andrews has been a director of the Equine Health Studies program at LSU for 14 years and was recently appointed the department head of veterinary clinical sciences. Most importantly, everybody wants to know what his interests are, and his clinical and research interests are in gastric ulcer disease and the effectiveness of supplements, as well as colic and gastrointestinal diseases of horses. So that is what he is here to talk about today, and he will start us off. But let me also welcome Dr. Wendy Pearson. She's a lifelong horse enthusiast. She worked in the thoroughbred racing industry in New Zealand and in Canada between 1990 and 2002, during which time she also spent 6 years as a research associate at the Equine Research Center at the University of Guelph, and that is in Canada. So that is why we have so many Canadians. Thank you for joining us. Wendy completed an MS in neurological toxicology and a PhD in biomedical toxicology at the University of Guelph. She specialized in medicinal herbs and nutraceutical supplements for animals, during which time she founded and was president of the Nutraceutical Alliance Incorporated and Lynn Farm Horse Park until 2018. She's currently the Associate Professor of Equine Physiology at the Department of Animal Biosciences at the University of Guelph in Canada, and her research focuses on developing in vitro and in vivo models to advance our understanding of inflammatory conditions affecting horses and companion animals and prevention by targeted nutrition. So our final speaker tonight will be Dr. Sarah White Springer. She is an associate professor of equine physiology at Texas A&M University. After receiving her PhD from the University of Florida, she completed a postdoc training at the University of Kentucky in human and marine models in muscular disease. Her current research program centers around modulation of skeletal muscle metabolism and health, disease, and performance. Dr. White is definitely a rising star in the field of mitochondrial biology, whose programmatic efforts are highly regarded for excellence in research, as evidenced by nutritional and international presentations, recruitment of horse industry collaborators, and funding support of over $3 million. And that is huge for those of you who would like a number, especially with equine research. She has authored and co-authored 25 journal articles, 52 abstracts, mentored 9 masters and 2 PhD students as chair of their committee. She's also served as primary instructor for 7 courses. So not only is Dr. Springer an amazing researcher, but she's an accomplished horsewoman and has multiple titles with her Arabian sport horses. And I know her young one is very cute. So with that being said, those are my introductions. I would like to welcome Dr. Andrews to go ahead and share his screen and to start his presentations.
Welcome everybody to the horse management seminar, and I'll get started right away with my talk on ulcer supplements. So we'll move forward here. Let me see if I can get my clicker working here. There we go. So first of all, equine gastric ulcer syndrome is one of these descriptive terms that's kind of an umbrella term for ulcers in the non-glandular and glandular mucosa. And I've remember that the horse has 2 regions of the stomach. It's a bicavity type stomach. It's lined by squamous epithelium on the top part of the stomach, and on the bottom part has glandular mucosa, similar to you and I. So I have some pictures here. These are pictures from the endoscopic view of the stomach. And the one on the left is the upper part of the stomach, or the glandular, non-glandular mucosa. And the bottom part is the glandular mucosa. And it's kind of a pinkish. And this is a horse that had ulcers in both regions of the stomach. So we're going to talk a little bit about how these supplements might work on these ulcers in the stomach, in both regions of the stomach. I also want to make a point that when we're using supplements, they shouldn't be used as pharmaceutical agents. So no supplement should be used to treat any kind of medical condition like gastric ulcers. And so we want to emphasize that really the use of a pharmaceutical agent like omeprazole or Gastrogard paste should be utilized in horses that have been diagnosed by a veterinarian to have gastric ulcers. It should be the first line of defense. What we want to emphasize is that supplements should only be used in those situations where we're maintaining stomach health. So if you see an ulcer, treat the ulcer with pharmaceutical agents until that ulcer's healed, and then utilize the supplements. Now, you can treat with the GastroGuard and then add the supplements as well, which is very helpful and can maintain stomach health while the horse is being treated with this pharmaceutical agents. And so I wanted to start out by saying that we do have some supplements that maybe you don't think about, but alfalfa hay is what I consider a supplement. In the studies that we did with Dr. Jennifer Nadeau, who is at the University of Connecticut, and when she was a graduate student of mine at the University of Tennessee, we looked at alfalfa hay has a dietary antacid. And we showed that alfalfa hay, along with grain, does have, in those horses for the first 6 hours or so, the pH in the stomach is very high. In other words, there's a decreased acid. So higher pH, less acid when you feed alfalfa hay. And we also noticed that there were fewer ulcers in these horses as well. So what we proposed is that because of the high protein and high calcium present in the alfalfa hay, we term this as really dietary Tums. For those of you who have heartburn, you eat Tums. Well, alfalfa hay is the dietary Tums for horses. And we've shown that, and that's also been shown at Texas A&M in a study that they did with the horses that were exercising. So think of this as a dietary supplement. Some people don't like to feed a complete diet of alfalfa hay because it may increase the activity of the horse. But we think it's an excellent supplement and also a diet for the horse. And it can be considered as a dietary Tums supplement. And also, you probably didn't know this, but corn oil, I think, is an excellent supplement for horses. And at a study that was done, out of the University of Florida, Dr. Cargill in Dr. Merritt's lab down there showed that corn oil at a half to 1 cup twice daily in those horses, there was less acid produced, and there was more protection in the way of prostaglandins, these chemicals that are produced to protect the stomach. So we think that Mazola corn oil, it's cheap, and you could be any brand. I just use Mazola because I think most people in the US know what that is. But giving your horse corn oil as a supplement can really help decreasing the acid in the stomach and also increasing those protective mechanisms in the stomach. So, and then we have our traditional supplements. I pulled a few of these off the internet. And you can see there are many of these. I could have filled this slide up with those supplements that are on the internet. And we have this one that's called Faith. I think a lot of times because of the limited data that we have on these supplements is we're really going on faith when we look at the internet and we then pick out a supplement, because there's lots of marketing that goes into these supplements. And some of them have effects, some of them have studies done, and some of them, it's just they're utilizing some information from the human side and perhaps maybe from lab animals that have responded to these particular ingredients of the supplements. But I want to talk about some of the things that we've been doing at when I was at the University of Tennessee and also at LSU to kind of look at the science of these supplements. But I also wanted to bring up, you see that Dr. Carrie Williams, an article that her and Amy Burke published looking at high level CCI horses, 3-day event horses. And they did note that in that study, that the average horse was on 4.2 supplements. And so we know that people like you that are on this webinar use supplements. And so you want to know if those supplements that you're using are have efficacy for whatever you're using for them. You're not just spending money and it's not being effective. So we'll start out. We did some work with sea buckthorn berries and the product called Sea Buck 7. This is a product, kind of looks like orange juice, and it has lots of essential minerals, vitamins, phenol, antioxidant compounds. And I know the speakers tonight will talk a little bit more about antioxidants. And it was shown to prevent gastric ulcers in people and in lab animals, and it increased sperm motility in one horse. So and these are berries that are grown. You can see down here these orange berries. They're grown in Tibet at elevations of greater than 10,000 feet. So they concentrate these antioxidants in the berries, and it's the only supplement that contains sea buckthorn berries that are blessed by the Dalai Lama. So it must be a good product. And we did some studies. We were looking at gastric ulcers in horses, and this is we scoped these horses with an endoscope, and we found we looked for gastric ulcers, and then we put the horses in stalls and fed them, and then we had some a feeding stress model, a twice a day feeding, and we found that there was no effect of this product on non-glandular ulcers. In other words, ulcers up in that top part of the stomach. However, when we looked at glandular ulcers, the ulcers in that pink part of the stomach, we did find that this product, the sea buckthorn berry that contains sea buckthorn berries, did prevent ulcers from occurring in the stomach and that glandular portion of the stomach. And you see, these are horses that were untreated, and these were the horses that were on the supplement. So we did show that there was a prevention of these glandular ulcers. And that's what's been shown in people. So this is a product that if you had horses that were prone to glandular ulcers, then this would be a good product to use. We also looked at another product called Equine 250 and Equine SLH, and this contains some ingredients that have been shown to be effective in treatment in maintaining stomach health, containing pectin, lecithin, and acids, sodium bicarbonate, basically your baking soda. And we did find in this product, in the Equine product, now what the company that makes the Equine products, what they said is that the Equine 250 was prevention and the Equine SLH was for treatment. But we found that both products were effective, but it did take 35 days to see an effect on these horses. So, and we did see fewer and less severe ulcers in the non-glandular portion of the stomach, no effect on the glandular portion, and both products were equally effective. The SLH is a powder form, and the 250 is a pelleted form. So it just depends on what your horse likes the best. Sometimes the powder formulations, as the horse eats its grain, the powder drops down to the bottom of the bucket. And so maybe the pelleted form in those situations might be a little bit better. But I have to emphasize that if you're feeding supplements, you have to give them time to work. So this took up to 35 days of feeding before we saw an effect. And then we did look at and we worked with a company out of the Netherlands, and that product was a porcine hydrolyzed collagen product. And in that particular study, we did show that there was, and this is a product that is an additive. The company there does a lot of, makes a lot of supplements for a variety of different products. And we use their hydrolyzed collagen product. And we did show that this product was effective in a couple of ways. After 56 days, there was fewer and less severe ulcers, again, in that non-glandular portion of the stomach. And it was interesting to see that when we fed this along with the Meprazole or Gastrogard, the actual pH in the stomach increased over what the Meprazole caused an increase in pH. So it does have an antacid effect as well as an effect on ulceration, reducing the ulcerations in the horse. So this was effective as well. But it did take, again, 56 days. So feeding these products over a long period of time is very helpful. And then we got together with a group called Smart Pack, and I'm sure there's a lot of people on this webinar that have used Smart Pack products. Smart Pack is a company that likes to have data on the products that they sell, and so we did work with the group to formulate a product with for ulcers and maintaining stomach health, and it was called Smart Gut Ultra. And they produced this product, and they asked us, what do you think you would want to have in a supplement that would maintain stomach health? And we said, well, probably sea buckthorn berries, maybe aloe vera, pectin, lecithin, calcium carbonate, maybe some bicarbonate, and then maybe some of these prebiotics might be helpful. And so they put together this Smart Gut Ultra, and we looked at the effects of this pelleted supplement fed during and after omeprazole treatment. Remember, we said you want to treat the ulcers with omeprazole, but we fed these pellets along with omeprazole because we were hoping that maybe the combination of the medication and the supplement would even further heal those ulcers. And we found that there were fewer and less severe non-glandular ulcers in the stomach of horses after Gastrogard. So when we treated with the Gastrogard, we did notice that the ulcers were lower. Now, we didn't find that when we fed the supplement with Gastrogard, that there were fewer ulcers, because Gastrogard is very effective at healing gastric ulcers. And it did prevent the reoccurrence of ulcers. So once Gastrogard was withdrawn, then there was a rapid rebound of ulcers in these horses within 2 weeks. And it did prevent the reoccurrence of ulcers in these horses. And we also had fewer ulcers after the horses went through the twice-a-day feeding stress. So this, we think, is a good product to maintain stomach health in these horses. And we did look at ulcer scores and gastric juice pH. And this is the graphs just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So 28 days, which is 14 days after omeprazole is discontinued, you can see the B there, the kind of the bluish, it's supposed to be purple, but it didn't show up to be purple. But the blue B there means that that the untreated horses had significantly more ulcers than the group C there, the treated horses. And that continued in the A and B. There were fewer ulcers after the feed stress. And then, of course, at 42 days, it went back to their normal scores. So again, this product we feel has some efficacy in maintaining stomach health during horses in horses that are prone to stomach ulcers. And then we looked at a product that contains amino acids attached to these minerals like zinc, copper, manganese, and zinc. And so these products are interesting because they're found in some of the feeds, and I just showed you Nutrina. They contain these Zinpro performance minerals. So we looked at that. We wanted to determine if these performance minerals would be helpful in decreasing gastric ulceration or maintaining stomach health while the horses were on these supplements. So we teamed up with the Zinpro, and you can see the blue here is the Zinpro treated horses, and the inorganic, we used an inorganic zinc in the feed. And we fed the horses, and after 14 days, we treated the horses with GastroGuard, and you can see how GastroGuard was very effective in decreasing these non-glandular ulcers. Now, the horses were on the performance minerals at the same time. We didn't see a significant reduction due to the zinc because the omeprazole was so effective. And then as the horses went through the intermittent feeding, we did notice that the ulcers increased significantly in the beginning and after the omeprazole, as well as when we compared that to horses that were treated with the zinc performance minerals. So, so we noted that in the non-glandular stomach, that feeding these minerals that are attached to amino acids, these chelated minerals, can be very helpful. And we also noticed that the ulcer lesion numbers, so the number of ulcers, was also reduced in these horses. So we think that, you know, as you're looking at feeds, that looking for feeds that have these amino acids, and as we showed you, that the amino acids attached to these minerals. So just to you know, sort of give you some conclusion. So the zinc, the Zinpro performance minerals resulted in less severe gastric ulcers in the horses. And this was during period 2 when there was adequate nutritional balance. And then the Zinpro minerals, we feel at levels used in these feeds may be beneficial at reducing gastric ulcer severity and maintaining gastric health after omeprazole treatment. So again, treat with omeprazole and then utilize these performance minerals that can be in feeds or separate in the horses. And then we worked with Purina for their Outlast product. We did some research on some larger horses that are housed in St. Louis. And in those horses, they were spending a lot of money each month and each year on GastroGuard, because the horses are stressed a lot from traveling and being in a lot of shows. They're very healthy horses, but you know, as we know, the stomach is prone to being having acid exposure. And so in that particular study, we showed that the control group, in other words, the horses that were not fed the Outlast, had an increase in the number of ulcers. And in the supplemented group, there was no change in the ulcers after 30 days of feeding. So we showed that in that situation, and the glandular ulcers tended to increase also. And this is the non-glandular ulcers in the first line. And then the second line here, the glandular ulcers tend to increase in the control group after 30 days of feeding. But there really wasn't significant, but we think it was clinically significant, but no change in the Outlast supplemented horses. So we feel pretty good that this product, because of its, and it's a calcium, mineralized calcium from marine sources. So it's slowly released in the stomach. And traveling horses only, and when we looked at the traveling horses, there was an increase in the ulcer scores in the control group, in other words, the untreated group. However, the horses that were traveling that were on the Outlast supplement had fewer ulcers. And so in this study, we determined that the Outlast supplement, a complex marine mineral compound, supports gastric health in these at-risk horses during times of travel. So, and I think there's probably a few people on this webinar that have horses that travel to shows in horse trailers, and those horses, you know, may benefit from utilizing the Purina Outlast mineral supplement. So again, some scientific evidence-based information on this supplement that's in Purina. So, and they have the supplement Purina Outlast, but they also have it in several of their feeds as well. And you can consult your nutritionist and veterinarian regarding the use of the Outlast. So, and then, I get a lot of questions about probiotics. Should I feed my horse probiotics, and do probiotics decrease gastric ulcers? So we teamed up with the University of Queensland in Australia, and we looked at horses that were treated over several weeks with probiotics and antibiotics. And we did note in this study that the probiotic group, there was a significant reduction in ulcer scores. Now, we did get more ulcer decrease when we fed antibiotics. But again, we don't want to feed a lot of antibiotics to horses because, again, that we want to be good stewards of antibiotics and not perpetuate resistance. However, the use of probiotics, using especially lactobacillus, and there was a study out of Japan that showed that these bacteria, lactobacillus, may coat the non-glandular mucosa and protect the stomach from erosive effects of acid. So again, I think the use of probiotics is warranted in horses that may be prone to gastric ulcers, and we did show that. But we don't know exactly which probiotics are the best to use, but certainly using one that has a lactobacillus in there may be helpful. And this is a study that was done with Rafat Al-Azmin out of the University of Queensland in Australia. And then there was a product out there. It's a polysaccharides product. Study was done out of and published in Journal of Equine Veterinary Science by Dr. Nathan Slovis at Haggard's Institute in Lexington, Kentucky. And this product contains hyaluronic acid and also a polysaccharide called schizophyllan. And this product, they did show in 10 thoroughbred horses that 90%, 9 out of 10 horses showed complete resolution and improvement in the ulcerated area, and an increased appetite, weight gain, and positive behavioral changes. And so they concluded that the polysaccharide blend represents a novel means to enhance gastric healing in active horses. Now, one of the things that I should emphasize is that there on racehorses on the racetrack, we are trying to minimize administering pharmaceutical agents to these horses, and the use of polysaccharides like this to heal ulcers may be a way to go, and it decreases the use of pharmaceutical agents on horses that are on the racetrack. So, and then we also looked at a supplement. It's important to know if supplements are safe. So we did team up with SmartPak and actually published in Equine Veterinary Education the effects of a supplement containing turmeric and devil's claw on equine gastric ulcer scores and gastric juice pH. And this supplement containing turmeric was at 1,200 milligrams and devil's claw at 2.5 grams did not cause a worsening of gastric ulcers or alter health parameters in horses after 28 days of feeding. We also want to be sure that these supplements are safe for horses. And so we looked at the gastric ulcer scores in these horses. And actually, we had a decrease in gastric ulcer scores after feeding these supplements, the supplements containing turmeric and devil's claw. So, and there has been labels on these products not to be fed to horses that have gastric ulcers. But we proved in this that really it doesn't worsen or cause gastric ulcers in horses when they're fed. So we also looked at a buteless called buteless performance paste, and we looked at curcumin, which is the active ingredient in turmeric, the turmeric root, and it was a product made by Longvita, or the Longvita is the brand name, and this product did not cause, it improved lameness. Also, we did a lameness study, and the ulcer scores did not worsen. In fact, they did get better, and the scores were actually lower after 30 days of administration. And the curcumin we showed was safe in horses. So again, showing that some of these these supplements are safe is very important, we feel. So in conclusion, I just wanted to make some recommendations for horses with gastric ulcers. So providing good quality hay throughout the day and night, feeding alfalfa hay. Remember, alfalfa is a feed, but it can also be used as a supplement. Even the pelleted formulations have been effective at increasing pH and decreasing ulcer scores in horses. Limit the starch and grain, and we always recommend weighing out your grain before feeding. So, and then use a grain that is chelated, that has chelated minerals like zinc, methionine, manganese, methionine, and other products, copper, that's attached to an amino acid. You can see that on the label. It says whatever the mineral is, and then it'll say amino acid. So that's very helpful. And then adding corn oil to the diet can increase energy levels and also help with the horse's coat and protect the stomach, especially the glandular portion of the stomach. Using GastroGuard for the initial treatment, we want to emphasize supplements are not medications and should never be used to treat any conditions. And then using SmartGut Ultra and after GastroGuard treatment to prevent that rebound hyperacidity after discontinuing omeprazole treatment. And then using Outlast supplement from Purina, we think is a very, very good way. And it can complement the alfalfa hay ability to increase the pH and then help with that acid, neutralizing the acid. And then monitor your horse for behavior and contact a veterinarian as soon as possible when your horse has issues. And maybe when the horse has reoccurrence of those issues. And I have a article that we published along with Connie Larson and Pat Harris, two nutritionists. I'm not a nutritionist, but we wanted to look at nutritional management and gastric ulcers. We produced this review article that's in Equine Veterinary Education. It's very easy to read and has all this information about the supplements. And I wanted to say that we have been funded by several of these companies to look at their products, but we're not under any obligation to report positive information. We always work independently of the company, and they're very thankful for that. So, and we also have a group of students, technicians, that we could not get these studies done without their help. And you can see we've had students from all over the world that have come to LSU to participate in these studies. So, and that concludes my talk. And yeah, you probably didn't know that Darth Vader was Darth Veterinarian before he went to the dark side. Certainly put your questions in the chat and I'd be more than happy to answer those. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Frank, very much. So I'm going to have Wendy, Dr. Pearson, if you want to go ahead and share your slides and turn on your video. We are going to save all questions until the very end. I do see there's a lot of questions that have come in. I've been trying to answer them, the ones that I'm familiar with. But Dr. Andrews, if you want to take a look at the Q&A box, you can see some of the questions and you can type some answers in as well. And everybody can keep typing your questions in the Q&A box if you do have any questions along the way. So Frank, I'll just ask you to turn your video off. I'm going to turn mine off and turn it over to Dr. Pearson.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and thanks so much for inviting me to come and join this webinar. I think it's so important to do things like this where, you know, it's one thing when we're science geeks hanging out in the lab and doing our research, but if all it does is sit on a benchtop, it's really no good to anybody. So I think it's so important to do these types of events. So just want to do a big shout out to Carrie for organizing this, and thanks so much for inviting me. It's really great to be here. So I'm going to talk mainly about equine joint supplements. So, and I'm going to focus just on research that we've done in our lab. And you may remember from Frank's excellent talk that we just heard, one of those slides, you probably noticed that he talked about what some of the elite riders are using. And there was a long list there of supplements for various ailments. And you probably noticed that equine joint supplements was pretty high on the list. I can't remember the number, but it was somewhere around 40% of people were using these. And so this is big business, right? So this is why I've entitled this talk, Making Sense of Equine Supplements, because boy, there's a lot of really great ways to get rid of money if you're so inclined to buying some of these products. So what I'm going to talk about is just to give you a little bit of a background on really what joint supplements are and why it is that, you know, it gets so much attention. So we'll talk a little bit about arthritis, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So, okay, so if you think about the equine joint, and if I was to ask you a question like, what's its job? Well, you would say, well, Wendy, obviously the job is to hold up the horse, right? And of course that is true, but the joint has other jobs as well. So one of the things that a good healthy joint really needs to do is it needs to facilitate frictionless motion. So when that limb is moving and sometimes withstanding very high forces and going at very high speed, you can imagine if you had really any friction in that joint, one of the big things that's going to happen is you're going to get heat, right? So in order to prevent that heat from happening during, you know, these pretty high intensity type workouts, you need to have smooth, frictionless motion. So the other job of the joint is to really resist these shear and compressive forces. So if you can just imagine for a second, you know, you think about your 500-600 kilogram horse that's moving over ground at, you know, very high speed. A lot of time, you know, if all of that weight is sometimes on a single hoof that's, you know, this big around. So imagine the forces that are going up those limbs and as that body weight comes down onto the ground. And it's really the job of the joint to be able to resist those massive forces that are going through the limb. So in order to do its job really well, there's a bunch of things that need to happen. So one of the things is it needs to be able to tolerate these high forces without feeling a lot of pain. Because, you know, if you took the same sort of force that goes up a horse's limb and you took that force to the face, imagine that. Right, that would probably trigger a lot of pain. So have you ever thought about, well, how come it doesn't do that when you get that same forces going up the limb, right? So one of the reasons for that is because the joint is really designed to withstand that. So it blunts pain signals. So one of the signals that it blunts is a chemical, actually, that Frank also mentioned, that's called prostaglandin. And prostaglandin is, you can almost think of prostaglandin as the sort of the prototypical pro-inflammatory compound. So when you give bute to a horse, PGE2 or prostaglandin is what you're trying to block. So in a joint, you want to have cartilage within that joint that doesn't make a lot of PGE2 when that limb is loaded. So if it doesn't make too much PGE2, you don't get a lot of pain, right? So that's one thing. The other thing that needs to happen within a joint is the joint itself is typically under negative pressure. So it's almost like, you can kind of think of it like the skin is sort of shrink wrapped around the joint. And so it does that to really help balance out that joint and prevent sort of movements outside of the normal range of motion. And within that negative pressure, we also have pressure inside the cartilage. And that's really important to maintain the ability of the cartilage to basically bounce like this, right? So that bouncing capacity is due in part to other chemicals inside the cartilage that are called, we'll call them glycosaminoglycans. That's what us science geeks call them. But really, you can just think of them as gags. And these little gags that are hanging out in cartilage tissue, their job is to hold on to water. So if they can hold on to water really well, that means the cartilage tissue is basically like a really tight sponge. And when you do that, it makes the cartilage nice and bouncy and allows it to do this part, right? Resist shear and compression force. So you can imagine if you lose gags from your cartilage, that means that cartilage is going to have less water inside it, and it's going to be less able to resist these shear and compressive forces. So we want these in cartilage. The other thing that needs to happen with healthy cartilage is you need to have viable cells. That means these cells need to be living and active metabolically. And the sort of the annoying thing about cells that live in cartilage is they don't actually like to divide very well. So most cells in the body are quite happy to divide, and we have lots of turnover. But in the cartilage, not so much, right? Those cells are just kind of hanging out there, and they don't really like to divide very well. So if you have a situation that triggers cell death, that can actually be quite damaging to cartilage because, and this is one of the reasons why arthritis becomes kind of a degenerative problem, because when you start getting these cells dying off, the ones that are remaining don't actually replicate that well. So cartilage doesn't repair itself very well at all. The other thing to remember about cartilage is it actually doesn't have its own blood supply. So when you get these little erosions on the surface of the cartilage, they actually don't heal very well because there really isn't a blood supply there to bring nutrients to facilitate cartilage repair, as well as to take away metabolic waste. So we have quite a lot of problem with cartilage repairing itself. And that's one of the reasons why arthritis is such a big problem. You know, I would even go so far as to say, you know, Frank talked earlier about doing some research with older horses, you know, horses over 20. I would hazard that pretty much every horse over the age of 20 has some sort of arthritic changes. You know, you could probably say the same about us, you know, old humans as well. But that's part of the reason why we have such an abundance of arthritis, because cartilage really doesn't want to heal itself well. Now, I want you to remember these things right here. Okay, I told you about PG2 being a pain chemical. I told you about GAGs being that compound that helps support cartilage structure. And then we talked about viability of cells. So we can actually measure that in cartilage. We can stain cells so that they fluoresce green when they're alive and they fluoresce red when they're dead. So we can actually measure this. And then indirectly, we also have this other chemical called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide has a lot of jobs within cartilage, but one of its jobs is to actually facilitate programmed cell death to some extent. So, so just keep in mind these things here, because when I start talking about some of the research that we do, these are a lot of the outcomes that we do look at. So we look at PG2 as an indicator of pain. We look at GAGs as an indicator of cartilage structure. And then we look at nitric oxide and viability of cells to give us an assessment of how alive these cells actually are. So just keep that in mind as we go through these slides. So not only is arthritis, I would say, almost inevitable, that's problem number one. Problem number two is that we don't actually have a cure for arthritis. You know, unlike, for instance, gastric ulcers, we know that GastroGuard works incredibly well. And we have great confidence in the fact that if our horse has a gastric ulcer and the vet recommends to have GastroGuard, we're going to give GastroGuard to that horse, and we're pretty confident that that's going to cure the problem. We don't have that for arthritis. We don't have a drug that we can give that will reverse the disease. The best we can hope for is to get a drug that will manage the clinical signs, right? Meaning that it will reduce the inflammation, reduce the lameness, but it doesn't cure the problem. So as soon as you take those drugs away, you're going to have those clinical signs coming back. So that is one of the reasons why we see this, right? We see all kinds of products that are marketed, you know, so incredibly well. Boy, the marketing machine in the nutraceuticals industry is really, it's extraordinary. They do an outstanding job of convincing us that their product is the best. And listen, there are some good products out there. But the problem is we don't have a lot of research that really helps us to know which ones they are, right? And I think Carrie mentioned this at the beginning of the webinar, that we really don't have a lot of research on most of these products. So you're in a buyer beware situation here. It's literally a matter of you using your own horse as a research horse. That's literally what it comes down to. So, it really helps. It will help you and it will help your horse if you start asking questions. This is one of the things that I tell people a lot, that if you ask questions of the company that you're buying products from, ask them, where's your research? I would really like to see your research papers, because believe me, if they've done research, they're going to be so happy to show that to you. And if they sort of dance around the question a little bit and say, well, this product has been shown to XYZ, I think I would be a little bit suspicious about that. So this is the way that you vote for companies to really invest in research, is by voting with your dollar, right? Voting with your purchasing power. And that, I think, is going to really help to push more companies and more products into a space that is evidence-based. So that being said, research does exist. I've spent the last 26 years doing research on equine supplements, and certainly in the early days, it was almost exclusively on arthritis in horses, and we do a lot of that research now today as well. But when you think about it, over 26 years, and I haven't actually counted how many we've done, but I wouldn't say it's one a year. So there's still a lot of work left to be done. But I want to give you a little bit of a kind of a driving lesson in terms of the approach that we take when we evaluate natural supplements or equine supplements for arthritis. So generally we do two things. Okay, the first thing is we want to find out what happens when we take this supplement and we expose cartilage to it. So usually we use cartilage that is taken from pigs that are being processed for human consumption. Now we do this as a first step because, well, a bunch of reasons. One is it's affordable, right? When you start talking about equine research, boy, you don't have to get very creative before you've spent well over $100,000. So when you have a relatively small company with a relatively small budget, to do these cartilage models is a really great first step to identify potentially bioactive compounds. So these cartilage models are affordable, they're fast, right? So we can take cartilage from a pig, we can stimulate this cartilage to behave arthritic. I won't get into how we do that because you probably don't care, but we do that. And we can have a result within 6 days, right? Whereas remember, Frank talked about sometimes you got to have 35, 56 days to see a result in the animal. We can see a result or not, as the case may be, within 6 days. So these are really fast, really affordable, and it's a great screening tool because you can use tissue from one single animal looking at all kinds of different doses at different concentrations. And so from that perspective, it's a really useful tool. It's not the be all and end all, by the way, because just because you know what happens when you put a product directly onto cartilage, it doesn't mean that is going to happen when it's in the animal, but it's a great place to start. So once we are able to identify some of these products or compounds that might be bioactive, then we can take them into these horse studies. So the horse study model that we usually use is we use a minimally invasive model where we inject a chemical into a horse's joint that the horse makes anyway, right? So it's called interleukin-1. And this is a chemical that the horse makes. We increase the concentration in the synovial fluid in the joint so that basically we're causing the joint, we're kind of fooling the joint into behaving arthritic. Now it does this for a relatively short period of time. When we inject this chemical, we'll have a peak, for example, in PGE2. Remember, that's the pain chemical. So we see a peak in PGE2 about 6 hours after we inject the interleukin-1. The horse does not go lame, by the way. We use very low doses, so there's no lameness here. And so after that peak, the PGE2 drops down again, and by 12 hours, no, not true, 24 hours later, it's completely gone. So what we do with this model is we cause an increase in some of these compounds in synovial fluid to mimic arthritis. And then we want to see, well, when we give this horse whatever supplement we're testing for a period of time, and then we challenge with this interleukin-1, does the peak that happened in synovial fluid, is it smaller? So essentially, that's what we're using to see whether these products actually work. So some of the joint supplement that we've looked at in cartilage models over the years, we've looked at a bunch of individual herbs. Mint, or we used a high rosmarinic acid mint, was very effective actually in both the animal. This is the thing about being at home, right? Very effective in the cartilage studies as well as in the live animal. We also did cartilage studies with turmeric and wheatgrass. So I'll show you a little bit about what happened with those. We've also looked at some oils. So we looked at an oil called Biota orientalis, and as well as this is Equine Omega Complete, which is a product that's it's an oil product with fish oil and soya oil and vitamin E. We also looked at some nutraceutical products. So we looked at shark cartilage. This is New Zealand green lip mussel, and abalone, which is I guess a shellfish off New Zealand. And then we've also looked at like commercial products. So there's a couple of examples there. There's a product called Mobility, another one called Heil Care, and Sasha's Blend. So we've looked at all of these in various ways. So I'm not going to show you the data, though in hindsight, after seeing Frank's wonderful talk, maybe I should have done that, but I didn't. But what I've done here is I created this little schematic, and I've highlighted the three main areas that we talked about right at the beginning. So we talked about pain. So remember, this is your PGE2. So when we're measuring cartilage production of PGE2 as a measure of pain, then we also have this bubble here, which is looking for loss of GAG, so that glycosaminoglycan from cartilage. And then this other bubble over here is for cell viability. So, and then I've positioned each of these things that we've looked at in terms of the bioactivity that we were able to measure. So these two products, so this was the Equine Omega Complete and the Heil Care, got really good effects in terms of reducing loss of GAGs from cartilage. So that indicates that these products are quite effective at protecting cartilage structure. So presumably, now again, this is just in cartilage, so we have yet to show that in the live animal, but that suggests that there's a potential that these products will protect against, a decline in cartilage structure over time. So then in this blue box here, we've got abalone. So abalone, now I've got it here in pain, even though it didn't have an effect on PGE2, but it did have an effect on nitric oxide. And nitric oxide, as well as being involved in cell viability, it also participates in inflammation. So I've put abalone down here. Mainly, its only effect that we were able to find was a decline in nitric oxide. And now if you go here where both cartilage structure and pain sort of interact, these compounds had effects on both. So mint was very strongly inhibitory to PGE2, but we also had some weaker effects on cartilage structure, but beneficial effects. Wheatgrass, this is really bioactive. We got very strong PGE2 inhibition as well as very strong inhibition of loss of GAGs from cartilage. So that, and I know wheatgrass is fed quite a lot to, at least in Canada here, to horses on the backstretch where they get this treat of wheatgrass, and boy, that stuff's really bioactive. We also looked at shark cartilage and this complex product here, mobility, and New Zealand greenlet muscle. These guys were more leaning to the cartilage structure health, but we were able to measure some effects on pain as well. And then if you go down here, Sasha's Blend and Biota, these two products were able to reduce the PGE2 production as well as increase cell viability. So that's a pretty cool mixture there, and fairly unusual. I don't see that a lot with these products that we look at in cartilage. And then lastly here, turmeric, this one did everything. So that one was very effective against PGE2 production in cartilage, as well as protecting cartilage structure. And it seemed to have a pretty pronounced effect on cell viability as well. So this is really just a visual to kind of let you see what we've seen in cartilage models. Now, some of these products we've also taken into the live horse. So I've got another one now. I've made this smaller because there are fewer of them. And so what you can see in here is mobility. This is a product that's produced by a company called Herbs for Horses. It's here in Canada. And mobility was very effective here at reducing PGE2, but we didn't get an effect on cartilage structure and we didn't see any other systemic effects of this product either. Sasha's Blend, this one is produced by a company called Intrapath that's out of Australia. And that was a very effective product here. So we've got really pretty good pain, or at least I shouldn't say pain, very good PGE2 inhibition. We didn't actually see any lameness, as I mentioned earlier in our model, but also really good protection of cartilage structure. So we got some good effects here in terms of pain and cartilage structure. Mint, this is this high rosmarinic acid mint, was effective both in terms of pain and cartilage structure, and also had this kind of interesting effect of reducing white blood cells in blood, but increasing them in synovial fluid. So it seemed to have some kind of role in increasing trafficking of inflammatory, or not inflammatory cells, but immune cells from the blood into the joint space, which may also be protective under certain circumstances. So just to keep it as short as I can, so a few take-home messages here. Research into equine joint supplements is really limited, and that's kind of the sad truth. But it does exist. So ask your nutraceutical companies to help you get access to the research that they've done. If you're curious about a product, if there's been any research done, I'm happy to talk to anybody via email, and my email will be on the next slide. And so feel free to email me if you've got questions about products. But at the end of the day, you guys are the ones that really drive this bus, right? So if you want your companies to start really investing in research, you've got to cast your vote for evidence-based supplements at the cash register. And that's really what's going to make a fundamental change. Okay, so that's it for me. I want to acknowledge our funding. We got lots of funding from lots of different places, OMAFRA, as well as Selected Bioproducts and Southern Equine Distributing, Intrapath and Green Life Acres and CERT Discovery. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Pearson, so much. And I think that's a great, PSA statement too, is yeah, absolutely. Look for your research. And I'm a firm believer of that. So with that being said, go ahead and turn your camera on, Dr. Springer, and go ahead and, share your slides like you're doing. And I'll turn off my camera. As I mentioned too, we won't take questions until the very end. So keep them throwing in there. And we'll take more questions as soon as Dr. White-Springer is done. Take it away.
So firstly, I would also like to thank Carrie and the group at Rutgers for inviting me to speak. I love doing these kinds of things, much like Dr. Pearson said. I think this is kind of maybe why we do our job. At the end of the day, we're horse people, and so we really want to benefit the horse. And so thank you guys for being here first and foremost. So I was asked to speak a little bit on dietary supplements to regulate inflammation, and specifically omega-3s. And so I will talk a little bit about that. Unfortunately, I'll go ahead and give you the sad news in the beginning. Much like Dr. Pearson said, we don't have a ton of research in the horse on these supplements. And so I'll show you what we've got. but I'll probably leave you with more questions than answers, which is what I call job security. So I think where a good place to start is actually to describe what inflammation is. One of the big problems I find with a lot of people that are looking to help with inflammation or help with their horse with inflammation is that they look at it as a bad thing. And I want you to kind of flip that in your brain a little bit. Inflammation is simply the body's attempt to return to homeostasis following some sort of insult or injury. We call this adaptation. And so when we first think of inflammation, we kind of think of the bad things, right? The cardinal signs of inflammation would be pain, heat, redness, swelling, and then potentially loss of function. I laugh a little bit at this image because we've all had joint pain, so I think we all understand what that person's going through. Just going to pull up my laser pointer here. Hopefully you guys can see it. So these are kind of what we think of when we think of inflammation. And then the horse, that shows the same way, right? We typically see it in maybe the lower limb where you've got some edema, you've got some swelling and potentially some heat. And so this is what we would call chronic inflammation. But acute inflammation is not bad. When they think about inflammation, however, there's different causes, right? So the first would be biological, and that could be from infection or disease or some sort of autoimmune, potentially disease such as allergies, some abnormal response that the horse is not, it is maybe overreacting, we might say. There's also a chemical cause of inflammation, and so that's simply due to poisons or toxins, something external typically that would cause that sort of inflammation. And then physical inflammation or physical causes of inflammation, injuries, burns. One thing that I think about a lot is exercise. I work in performance horses primarily, and so that's where my mind typically goes. And I think maybe coming off Dr. Pearson's talk was really quite great because we think about joints, right? Joint is where we see a lot of inflammation, and that's due to maybe too much stress on that joint or in that joint capsule. And so what I said in the beginning was that inflammation is not necessarily bad, right? There has to be some sort of inflammatory response to have an adaptation. And so what we typically see is after some sort of stressor, again, I think of exercise, we have this acute inflammatory response that's really intense, but then it subsides. And that's what we want. That's a good thing. But we don't really think about everything that's going on in that response. So prepare to be overwhelmed. This is what's happening. And we're not going to go through all of this individually here, but what I want you to understand is that it's a huge response. It's not one or two cell types or one or two markers that are being changed. Instead, you've got this inciting agent down here on the bottom left. And with that inciting agent, you've got this pro-inflammatory response. The point of that is signaling. That signals the body to then have some sort of positive response or adaptation that allows that inflammation to go down, and therefore that animal is now reprogrammed to be able to handle that stressor better the next time it comes around. Okay, so don't worry about all of those big words. Just know that we really need this inflammatory response in order to promote adaptation to enhance resolution and return to homeostasis. What we don't want is what we call a chronic inflammatory response. And that happens when you have a really big inflammatory response at the onset, but it doesn't ever resolve. It doesn't ever go away. And so whenever we're looking at different kind of inflammatory supplements, we don't really want to decrease this response because if we don't have it, we don't get adaptation. And I think that's important to remember when we start to look at the different research on some of these supplements. So, why are we interested in omegas? The main reason is that we feed horses wrong. Okay, if we think about how horses are meant to be fed or how horses are meant to eat, they were developed or evolutionarily speaking, they evolved so that they would eat continuously and they would eat a lot of forage. When we look at pasture and we look at the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, what we find is linoleic acid, which is the parent omega-6, is quite low in pasture. This is from a study that we did just as an example, but this is relatively true across most different grasses compared to concentrates. And then alpha linolenic acid in pasture, the parent omega-3, is quite high. Now, when we look at concentrate grains, which we all feed our horses, especially in the performance horse world, we see the inverse is true. So linoleic acid or omega-6 is really high, and linolenic or alpha-linolenic, omega-3 is really low. And so what we've done now is inverted the relationship of omega-6 to omega-3s in our equine diets. Why is that important? We know omega-3s and omega-6s are processed similarly. I'm sorry, this gets a little nerdy. Just stay with me. We'll get there. Omega-6s on the left here and omega-3s on the right. What happens is through a series of steps, we have desaturases, elongases, they get converted to other fatty acids. Now, the reason that we care about that is because there's certain fatty acids like these ones here, EPA and DHA, which is further down the line on the omega-3 side, that promote anti-inflammatory type properties, whereas the omega-6s result in arachidonic acid, which promotes pro-inflammatory. The reason that it's important to note these on the same slide is they use the same enzymes for these different steps. So the horse is not very good at converting these parent linoleic and alpha-linolenic acids to the more elongated polyunsaturated EPA, DHA, and arachidonic. So let's talk about the individual omega-3 versus omega-6s. What we care about in the little horse world, I wanted to title this talk, Not All Omegas Are Created Equal, because like I said, the horse is not good at converting alpha-linolenic to EPA or eicosapentaenoic. Don't worry, you won't be tested on this later. You also don't have to pronounce it. Or DHA, docosahexaenoic. But these are the two omega-3s that we're primarily interested in for their anti-inflammatory benefits. Both of these have been shown to be anti-inflammatory, not as much in horses, but in other species, and primarily because of their derivatives. And so that's mostly what we're interested in, is the derivatives of these fatty acids that then have the impacts on the body. On the other hand, now we have omega-6s, right? So I told you those come from linoleic down to gamma-linolenic. What that is converted to is actually kind of interesting, is dihomoganolinolenic. And so that we call DGLA. DGLA is actually can be anti-inflammatory. And so in general, we think of the omega-6s as pro-inflammatory because of arachidonic acid, which is what is converted to later. But DGLA has actually been shown to be anti-inflammatory. And so I don't want to completely negate the impacts or the positive potential impacts of omega-6s, but we have to be very specific in which ones we're talking about. Because DGLA not only has been shown to increase the anti-inflammatory prostaglandins, but it's also been shown to decrease the negative arachidonic acid derivatives. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in some of the studies that we've done here at Texas A&M. One problem that we have in horses, and like I said earlier, we can't just supplement with the parent omega-3s or omega-6s because the process to desaturate and elongate those is very inefficient in the horse. And so if we want to supplement, or if we want to increase the positive ones, EPA, DHA, potentially DGLA, we have to actually supplement with those specific fatty acids. So where did this all start? And I will focus mostly on some research that we've done, but also talk about a little bit that's been done elsewhere. This started back in my lowly days as an undergraduate. What you'll notice is the dates here, 2010 and 2021. I want to point out that this is actually the same study. I was just much slower in getting my work published, so I apologize for that. But where this started was Dr. Kelly Vineyard, who was a PhD student at the time at the University of Florida under the advising of Dr. Lori Warren. I worked on this project, but they were interested in looking at the effects of omega-3 fatty acid supplementation and the source of that omega-3 on the red blood cell and plasma membrane composition of fatty acids. And then I was interested in looking at how that impacted lipid peroxidation and oxidative stress. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go through. So what I wanted to focus on here and why all omega-3s are not created equal. Most people know that flaxseed and fish oil are both sources of omega-3s. However, like I just showed you in those previous figures, and this is why I had to show you this, is that flax oil has a lot of alpha-linolenic. So it's that parent omega-3. But like I told you, the horse is not good at converting that to the other omega-3 fatty acids. What fish oil has, on the contrary, is really high EPA and DHA. And so if we really want to get those beneficial long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, the fish oil appears to actually be better at doing that. And we actually showed that. So when we look at the plasma of these horses, green is the control horses, so they didn't get any supplement. Blue is the flax, and then orange is the fish oil horses. We saw that linoleic acid and alpha-linolenic were not very different in the plasma, but only in the horses that received fish oil did they have elevated EPA and DHA in their plasma. So just because both of these are sources of omega-3, they're not equally as efficient at increasing those omega-3s that we actually want in the plasma membranes. Only fish oil was effective at doing that. So I said I was going to talk about antioxidants briefly. Something about polyunsaturated fatty acids, which omega-3s are, or these ones that we're talking about, they have extra double bonds. I think way back, I should have pointed that out maybe. The reason that we call these omega-3s is because the last double bond is 3 carbons from the end of the long chain of carbons in that fatty acid. It is thought that those double bonds create more chance for the lipid to be targeted to create oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species, which can have negative impacts on the cell. And we hear a lot about antioxidants and oxidative stress in performance horses. And since that's my interest, then we also wanted to make sure that just because we're increasing these omega-3s that we know can be anti-inflammatory, we want to make sure we're not having any negative off-target effects. Kind of the most common antioxidants that we think about, especially within the lipid bilayer of the cell, are vitamin E and then its friend selenium. Vitamin E and selenium work very closely together, and so typically when we look at one, we must look at the other. What we found interesting here, on the top is the vitamin E, and so on the left is day 0, and then on the right is 70 days of supplementation. The white is the control horses, the black is the flax horses, and the gray is the fish oil horses. After 70 days of supplementation, the thought was if there was more lipid peroxidation, then the antioxidant vitamin E would be down because we would be using so much of it that it would just go away, right? We would have less of it. In fact, what we found is the horses receiving fish oil had more vitamin E than horses receiving either the control diet or the flax diet. Similarly, we saw no difference in serum selenium. We did see that it went down over time, but this could simply be due to age. This was in yearling horses, they were growing. And so this simply could have been due to the growth of the horse, but it was not different depending on treatment. We also looked at a marker of oxidative stress. It's called F2 isoprostanes. So like I said, we would expect serum vitamin E to go down if there was more oxidative stress, but let's look at oxidative stress itself. And in fact, in the fish oil horses, they actually had the lowest measure of oxidative stress. This was really great for us because there was so much data coming out concerned about this, that if we increase the amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids in the membrane, now we were going to increase all of this oxidative stress. And that simply was not the case. Now, I'll be very straightforward with you. This was in yearling horses that were growing. They were not in exercise training, and so they weren't under any kind of excess, maybe oxidative load. And so that could be a concern and something that we need to look at in the future. But to date, we don't have any data to show that any negative impacts of omega-3 supplementation. So I'll go back to Kelly's portion of the project, and she was interested also in the immune function of these horses receiving the different supplements. What they did was a skin test, and so they essentially, I want to equate it to a prick. So it induced an inflammatory response right at the skin. And what they found was that the horses receiving the control diet had a bit of an inflammatory response, but horses receiving either of the omega-3 supplements had a more robust response. And importantly, they came right back down to baseline as quickly as the control horses. And so remember when I talked about we needed to have that really robust inflammatory response to a stimulus to make sure that we have adaptation, but we want to make sure it resolves. In fact, that's what happened here with the omegas. And so maybe omega-3 supplementation can have these beneficial impacts on inflammation, even in vivo in the horse. So like I said, I love racehorses. And so moving forward, really far forward to last year or 2 years ago, maybe, I don't know, time kind of smooshes together. I had a child too, so things just go blank for a while. we wanted to work in racehorses. And so we were very lucky to be able to work with Kentucky Equine Research. Dr. Pagan is a friend of ours. And so he invited us down to his research farm in Florida because they were interested in looking at a new supplement that he wanted to test that had both EPA and DHA, which I'll show you on the next slide, but also that omega-6 DGLA, which has been shown to have anti-inflammatory impacts. And so for this study, we used 13 thoroughbreds that were in race training, active race training. And we know that's a very inflammatory and oxidative insult. And so these horses are already at an elevated kind of maybe stressed load when we're looking at the cellular level. So what we did in these horses was we supplemented them with this supplement, which I'll talk about in the next slide, for, gosh, I don't even have it on here. I believe, yeah, 12 weeks. Sorry, I was like, I'm getting my studies confused. So we put them on diet for 12 weeks while they were exercise trained. And then at 12 weeks, they underwent a exercise test that simulated what they would do in a race. So they did a breeze, a very fast breeze on a racetrack. And then we took blood samples both before and after this exercise test. So here's the dietary treatments. This one was quite interesting because we wanted to make sure that we actually had the same omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. We just used different fatty acids to get there. And so in the control diet, we use those parent fatty acids, the alpha-linolenic and the linoleic acid. But in the treatment diet, they had all three of EPA, DHA, and GLA to get that DGLA that we wanted. And so like I said, their omega-3s and omega-6s actually weren't different in total diet. It was just simply how we were providing them. More data, because I'm a scientist and that's what I do. Only 2 of these, I don't want to overwhelm you. But what we found was that one of the cytokines that we typically refer to as pro-inflammatory, interleukin 8, actually decreased immediately after, or 24 hours after exercise, I apologize, in the treatment horses, but not in the control horses. So one thing about cytokines in horses is we really don't know much about them. They're very, very low in general, especially in the blood. And the technologies that we've had to date don't give us the opportunity to actually capture that level because it is so low in the horse. Most studies that have looked at in cytokines in the horse have looked at what we call mRNA. If you've been keeping up with COVID vaccines, you've probably heard mRNA quite a bit. mRNA tells us the message. So if that certain cytokine is being maybe told by the body to upregulate, but it doesn't actually tell us if the protein has been made. And so while we can say a certain supplement or a certain intervention increase the message, we haven't been able to say to date, does that actually increase the active protein? So I am a bit of an overachiever, and we've discovered a new technology that's been used in human and rodents primarily, as well as non-human primates. And I've decided to validate it in the horse. It's been a labor of love, but so far we've gotten a couple of the cytokines validated, and it's allowed us to actually quantify the protein level of some of these cytokines. And so all of that to say, I can't tell you what this means. We think that because IL-8 is considered a pro-inflammatory cytokine, and that perhaps it was decreased during this resolution phase in the treatment horses, that's a good thing, but I can't tell you for sure. I think it's promising that we're actually seeing differences in treatment here just simply due to diet. I think that's really exciting. And I think that sometimes we maybe discredit how much impact we can have just simply by changing something in the diet. And so maybe keep a lookout on some of these data. I think it's going to be really neat moving forward. Another cytokine that we looked at was interleukin 10. We know that interleukin 10 is a potent anti-inflammatory cytokine. And so here I feel really good saying that the treatment horses had this robust increase in IL-10 immediately after exercise, whereas we didn't see that increase in control horses. And I think that's probably a good thing. So that's telling us that there was probably a robust inflammatory response. IL-10 was activated really well to help bring that inflammation back down post-exercise. And then the horse was able to perhaps repair cellular damage a bit more quickly than in the control horses. Of course, we haven't looked that deep yet. I will say some other work that's been done looking at stride length. So this is all at the cellular level, right? But what are the implications now, just looking at clinical differences in the horses? Some work out of Michigan State University looked at stride length with omega-3 supplementation and found that trot stride length increased, but walk stride length was not changed. And so they considered that might be a positive impact of omega-3s. However, like I also said at the beginning, most of these studies use different types of omega-3s, different amounts. And so it's really hard to compare across studies to say, what is the right amount? How much should we be feeding? How long do we need to be feeding to see these impacts? So keep that in mind. Something that I found kind of interesting was a recent, gosh, I guess it's not recent anymore. I'm dating myself. A fairly recent study in 2015 out of Italy actually found that supplementation with omega-3 fatty acids increased resting serum amyloid A. Serum amyloid A, we typically look at as an inflammatory marker. So whenever we see an increase in serum amyloid A, we think of it as a bad thing. So I found it quite interesting that the omega-3 supplementation increased serum amyloid A, when in fact we typically see maybe a more of an anti-inflammatory effect. This was in exercising horses, and so there's certainly a question as to, again, what was supplemented, what was the control diet? This is a big problem in some of these studies, is that the control diet actually has more omega-6s, and so it's really hard to compare across treatments. But there is data out there, some of it questionable. I didn't present some of that data on purpose, but I think it's really promising maybe that we have some of these differences, at least with the omega-3s, and I think we need to focus on exactly what we should be feeding these horses and how much and how long, and really thinking about our outcomes as well, and how meaningful those are. One thing I wanted to touch on is a lot of the research in omega-3s and their anti-inflammatory benefits have been done in disease states. One of the primary ones has been in any kind of respiratory disease, so recurrent airway obstruction or inflammatory airway disease. And most of these have shown an improvement in different outcomes in horses with respiratory disease after omega-3 supplementation. What I wrote here was greater improvement because most of them have also paired the omega-3 supplementation with other managerial changes. So low dust feeding, low dust management. And so they can't strictly say the omega-3s were, the cause of this improvement, but they did have greater improvement if they were on supplementation compared to just the managerial changes. Some other things, and something that Dr. Pearson referenced, was that sometimes we like to look at things outside of the animal, and that gives us a clue on if we think there's actually going to be an impact. There was a study that showed that alpha-linoleic acid directly to equine synovial explants, so similar to what Dr. Pearson was talking about, decreased that PGE2 production, which is considered pro-inflammatory, after being stimulated with a toxin. And so at least in vitro, it seems that some of these omega-3s can have beneficial impacts, but just remember that something that is fed has to get through the intestine, absorbed, and then through the bloodstream to the actual joint or the tissue in which you want it to access. And so we have to be careful in how we interpret some of these data. One thing that I found interesting was some recent work. See, now I can say recent because this was 2019, looking at microalgae that's actually quite high in DHA. And this was in EMS horses, so equine metabolic syndrome horses. This supplement did not impact cytokines in those horses with the metabolic syndrome. But again, this was simply DHA. They did not supplement EPA. And so maybe more research needs to be done in that area. Certainly more research in general needs to be done in performance horses, my favorite, but also in other kind of maybe more stressed horses. Or my favorite also is the weekend warrior that may not get the most work during the week, but then may go on a long trail ride on the weekend, or may go to a barrel event or something like that. We simply don't have the data in those type of horses to give much take-home information. And so one thing I also wanted to touch on, again, focusing on anti-inflammatory supplements, is are there other ones other than omega-3s? And there certainly are. We've done 2 studies. I'm glad that Dr. Andrews brought up the Zinpro minerals, because we also work quite closely with Connie and Zinpro. But the first one we looked at was Saccharomyces cerevisiae fermentation product. We call this a postbiotic. And we found that it actually did improve exercise-induced stress markers. So we saw less of a pro-inflammatory response. We also saw decreases in serum amyloid A. So there are other anti-inflammatory supplements that we're investigating. And I think that we just need more work in this area. Also, as Dr. Pearson said, unfortunately, money is not high. And so it's difficult to do some of these studies because it's just very, very hard to get them funded. But we know that there are certain supplements that can have anti-inflammatory benefits. Kind of another fun one, I remember seeing the Nutrina Safe Choice product on Dr. Andrews' slide, but that also has this product in it. I don't know that it's marketed highly on there. I think someone else asked the question about how do you know if the Zinpro minerals are in there? Sometimes you need to ask specifically of that product to know exactly which source they're using for some of their nutrients. But we also, this one hasn't been published yet. It hopefully will be. I just haven't had time to get to it. But we also did a study looking at those Zinpro trace minerals and did find that it improved some of the inflammatory response within the joint in young exercising horses. And so hopefully that will get published soon. You'll be able to see some of those differences. But just know that there are other inflammatory supplements that we're investigating actively. So what's the take home of all of this? We need more research. I don't think we have enough. There's certainly not enough in the live animal. And certainly not enough that we can easily compare across studies because there's just hasn't been good, I don't think there's a good idea of exactly what we should be doing. I guess that's a very kind of crude way of putting it, but we just don't have that kind of information at this time in the horse. What I will say is there does appear to be potential beneficial impacts of omega-3 supplementation, and we haven't really seen any negative side effects. And so as far as efficacy or as far as safety is concerned, I think omega-3s are certainly safe. And I think if you just go back to simply how the horse is meant to be fed, he's meant to have more omega-3s in his diet than he's probably currently getting, especially if he's on a heavy grain concentrate. And so I don't think it would be a bad thing to supplement just for the hope, right, that there might be potential beneficial impacts. And so I didn't go through and thank all of my funding sources, but for this work, Kentucky Equine Research was certainly one, Zinpro Performance Minerals, and the department is actually fairly supportive of our research efforts as well. And so I really want to make sure to thank them. Also, I want to thank my horses, because if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't be here. And this is why I do what I do. And so I really like people to know that this is my passion. On the left here is my little devil horse named Amira. We showed through Pre-St. George. She's now fat, happy, and retired. There's nothing wrong with her. She's just a jerk. This is my new baby horse that Carrie referenced. He's a 4-year-old Arabian. He's 16.3. So for those of you that didn't know they made tall Arabians, they do. And he went national champion this year. So very proud of my horses and very excited to be able to share this with you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And yes, I would be very proud of your horses as well. So what we're going to do, and Kyle can go ahead and pin the 4 of us to the screen, and we're going to go ahead and throw out some of the questions. And I will say, with all of the hundreds of questions that I've seen coming in, I know Frank has been hard at Dr. Andrews. Thank you for answering some of those. I also have, but I've also put together some categories of questions. So I'm going to throw out just a couple of them. Whoever wants to chime in, if it's in your field, great. But the first one I'm going to start with is kind of to everybody. And it's one that I just kind of, I guess, want to see what everybody has to say about it. And it's come up several times because I know everybody has mentioned about the funding and how we need more funding for these supplements. So I think the big burning question was, why? Why are we so short on supplement funding for the research? And what can we do about it?
Maybe I'll jump
everyone's
in there.
laughing.
Oh boy, there's so many answers to this question. But, I would argue that maybe one of the reasons is because, when you're a pharmaceutical, you can go to the expense of being, tested and what have you, and then you have patent protection at the end. And you have the opportunity to recoup a lot of your research investment. A lot of these supplements, you can't do that, right? Take turmeric, for example. You can't go and do all kinds of research on turmeric and then patent turmeric. It doesn't quite, I mean, you can actually, but it's not quite as the same sort of process as you would do for pharmaceuticals. So I think you have less opportunity to recoup your research investment. And then if you go and spend all this money on research and then jack up your prices, and you're on the shelf next to a product that hasn't had research and is half the price, you know, a lot of times the consumer is going to buy the cheap product. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Mhm. Anyone else?
And I'll maybe add to that, in that I think people don't understand how expensive horse research is. You know, just to give the audience an example, if we want to run, you know, kind of a good solid study for however long, we're looking at $100,000. And that's not a small chunk of change. And so I think that's a lot of times also what some people don't realize is just how expensive it is to do these projects well.
Yeah, I would second that, Sarah, is that, you know, even though we have a herd of 90 horses at our farm, we don't have to pay for horses, but we have to keep them. You know, when they're out in pasture, they're charging us around $6 a day for the 90 horses. So you can see we spend a lot of money. So we can't really do the studies for free. We do have some capital that from funding from the state that we can use, but the studies are very expensive. And I think, you know, the supplements are very price oriented for clients. You know, if they're feeding a lot of, you know, we said that the horses, you know, clients feed about 4 supplements per day. You know, that can add up fairly quickly as far as cost goes. So, but I would encourage, you know, researchers to do more research, but it's difficult when you, especially when you're in a university setting and, you know, you have to publish your parry, so to speak. So.
Yep. Great answers. So I'm going to start just kind of doing a round robin with some of the questions that I've seen. You guys can still ask questions, but we are limited on time, so I'm not sure how many we're going to get to. But this one's for Dr. Pearson. Dr. Pearson, can you comment about the pharmaceutical products for joints versus the oral products? So things like, you know, Equine, Legend, those sorts of things.
Well, I have to say I don't have a lot of experience with the injectables. For me, I deal mainly, exclusively with the dietary ones. I have looked at some of the research on some of the injectables. I know the Equine, which is that the muscle one, I believe, or is that the Legend? I can't remember. Is that the Legend?
Equine's muscle.
Okay, yeah. So that research, if I am correct about that, came out of Colorado State. And it seems to have reasonably good efficacy in terms of reducing some of the clinical signs of arthritis. The injectable hyaluronic acid that goes directly into the joint also has some good research behind it. And I think that one is an interesting one because it seems to have an effect to, how do you put this? That basically, because hyaluronic acid is such a big molecule, when you inject hyaluronic acid and then you load the joint, essentially these molecules, they're really sort of slippery and they end up getting pushed off to the side of the joint capsule. And in some ways, they actually protect against loss of natural hyaluronic acid. So that seems to be one of the ways in which they work. And they're also they are also a glycosaminoglycan. So they hold water the same as the GAGs we talked about earlier. So they make the synovial fluid more thick, more viscous. So they allow better frictionless motion by doing that. So I think that there's a pretty good baseline of research around the injectables, certainly a lot better than what we have for the dietary ones.
Yeah, I think the other issue is what we call bioavailability. So, when you're feeding a supplement that contains hyaluronic acid, does it really truly get to the joint? Whereas you administer that in the muscle or actually in the joint, then you know that product is getting where the injury is or where the inflammation is. So I think that's why they've developed, I know that's why they've developed these injectable forms, and so that they can bypass the intestines absorption of these materials. A lot of these, like Wendy says, is they're very high molecular weight. Now they're big particles, and so they're not absorbed very well when they go through the small intestine. So, and they never get, they just stay in the manure. So that's one of the problems. But if you give it in the muscle, or if you give it right in the joint, then you know the product's working. So,
Dr. Weitzbringer, one's for you. So bottom line, what supplement would you feed to give your horses a higher omega-3 fatty acids, and how much would you recommend?
That's not fair. So y'all are going to kill me. I'm not supposed to do this. So I have the biggest problem with omega-3 supplements is if you're going to get the most bang for your buck if you feed in oil form. However, oils go rancid very quickly, and oils can go rancid that we can't actually smell. The horse can smell it before we can. And so if you don't get a very stabilized version, then you don't actually get the benefit. And a lot of times your horse won't eat it anyway because he smells the rancidity. So gosh dang it, you're gonna make me do this. My favorite is KER EO3. It's the one I've had the best luck with, especially with palatability. And it has research behind it to show that it's actually incorporated into the plasma membrane.
Is that a fish oil based?
It's a fish oil based, yes.
That was some other questions came through, is how do you get your horse to eat fish oil?
Yeah,
and I know a lot of them they remove the fish scent and stuff.
Yeah, you won't smell the fish at all. The one that we used in that it was a 2006 study, there you go, was actually, it smelled like bananas. It was super strange, but yes, they do not smell like fish.
Awesome, thank you. And we'll go back to Dr. Andrews. There was a lot, and I'm sure you've seen them, and you probably answered some of the corn oil questions, but a lot of questions came through on efficacy of just using corn oil to help buffer the stomach or to help coat the stomach and to help with gastric ulcers. Can you just kind of make some blanket statements about feeding your horse corn oil to help with gastric ulcers?
So yeah, and those in the study with corn oil, they did show that it did produce those prostaglandins, those protective prostaglandins, and as well as reducing acid, stomach acid. So it's a very cheap way to prevent ulcerations, but only in the glandular portion of the stomach. So and it does have energy, increases energy for horses, and so we did a study with rice bran oil as well as stabilized rice bran oil and corn oil. And corn oil, none of them were significantly effective at decreasing ulcer scores, but corn oil was the closest. So whether the p-value 0.06 versus a p-value of 0.1 makes a difference. But it did prove out when the study was done at Florida, and those were horses that actually they measured prostaglandin levels in the stomach, and they measured acid in the stomach. So it was effective in both of those. So we feel like corn oil. I don't know about. I know probably rice bran oil, stabilized rice bran oil, probably is not effective. But I don't know about canola oil and some of the others, flaxseed oil. Chia seeds, there's a lot of different things out there that have oil in them that I don't know. There was a lot of questions. I tried to answer some of those. I think they chose corn oil because it was cheap, and that's what horse owners are looking for, that's something that's cheap and effective. So, and that's what we want. You don't want to be spending, you spend a lot of money on buying your horses or, training them and things like that. And, if we can get by with feeding them the best for the least amount, then that's the way to go, right?
Yeah, and regardless of your hand being raised, Dr. Springer, I was going to throw it back to you anyway, because I know there's a big concern about the high omega-6s in the corn oil over the omega-3s. So what's your comment there?
That's what I was going to say. I let my audience down and not bringing that up. So it's actually quite interesting, to me, that the corn oil is what's been showing the improvement on the ulcer scores, because we try not to feed corn oil because it is really, really high in omega-6s. And so it just exacerbates the issue that we're already having in our equine diets. So Dr. Andrews, you probably know this better than I do, and maybe the answer is we don't know, but I don't think they've even looked at the fish oils or anything like that relative to ulcers, have they?
No, it was only the corn oil.
Yeah.
No, none of the other oils. were incorporated in that study. And I think a lot of it was because Dr. Merritt ended up retiring from the University of Florida. So they just looked at the corn oil. And I think they were just looking at, what was the cheapest.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
and I will say too, Dr. Pagan's going to murder me, but I'm pretty sure that they actually just published a study with that same product that we tested in the exercising horses and the cytokines. We actually looked at BAL also, but I'm almost certain they did ulcer scores on that. And if I remember correctly, it actually did decrease ulcer score. But let me find the paper and actually send that because I don't want to speak incorrectly.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, we're winding down with time, but I'm going to throw first a quick one back to Dr. Pearson. A couple people asked about that mint that you were talking about in your studies. Specifically, what kind was it? And can you just comment a little bit more on the mint?
Yeah, so the mint one was amazing, actually. It was a wild type mint that was selectively bred at the University of Guelph, and it was bred to overexpress rosmarinic acid. So rosmarinic acid is thought to be one of the main anti-inflammatory compounds in mint. Now, it was interesting because the research that we did with that, we tested isolated rosmarinic acid at the same exposure rate as the tissue would have had with the mint as well. So we tested the mint as well as isolated rosmarinic acid. The mint was extraordinarily bioactive. The rosmarinic acid did almost nothing. So it's certainly not, what we do know about it is it's not, at least not just the rosmarinic acid. Now, it could be the rosmarinic acid working together with other things, but in and of itself, it wasn't just the rosmarinic acid. So this was the plant species was Mentha spicata, and it was the breed of mint was actually the rights to it was sold by the university's Office of Research to a commercial company whose name I actually don't know. So they're now manufacturing products, presumably with this high rosmarinic acid mint. So yeah, it was pretty cool, that research, actually.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And with all the questions here, I think we could be on for another 3 hours. But I know we won't keep you guys that long. Before I give my final thank you, Kyle reminded me that we pulled our door prize winner. So I would like them to just give us a thumbs up or a yay in chat to let us know they're here. It looks like they're still on, but we have pulled Sarah Meyer, and that's Sarah with an H and Meyer. So if Sarah Meyer will enter in her chat that she's excited to win the Triple Crown door prize, and we will send her her information to Kelly Payne of Triple Crown, and she'll be in contact with you via email to select your prize. And I'm still waiting to hear from Sarah Meyer because we do have a second up. So if you're not on still, we're going to pull another name. I know everybody's congratulating Sarah, but if Sarah's not here, Sarah doesn't get it. So we'll give her a little bit and then I'll call another name. But Kyle did go on and remind everybody that we have a survey that we would love you to take just 3 to 5 minutes and fill out. I get all of our next year's speakers and topics from the surveys that are filled out this time around. And overwhelmingly, we had more people ask about nutrition and nutritionally related topics last year than anything. So that is why we have decided to do a full series of nutrition talks at this Horse Management Seminar. And I'm going to go up and pull up a few slides from the Equine Science Center as well, just in closing. And there's Sarah Meyer. Thank you very much, Sarah. Congratulations today to be our winner. You'll hear from Kelly Payne at Triple Crown. But our Equine Science Center has a few partners that they would like to thank. We also have 2 more webinars coming up. Next Wednesday, we have nutritionally related diseases with Dr. Christine Urschel at University of Kentucky and Dr. Shannon Pratt-Phillips at North Carolina State. And on February 22nd, we have a pasture and forage day. We have Dr. Amy Burke at the University of Maryland, and we actually have another University of Maryland person, Dr. Amanda Greb, talking to us about alfalfa and some forage-based diets. So we hope to see you all there. If you're in New Jersey, please join us for our Horse Industry Summit on March 16th. We have a big giving day coming up, along with a junior breeder symposium on March 26th. We have Ag Field Day on the 29th. We have so much going on. I will direct you to our website, esc.rutgers.edu, for more. You can find out all of our happenings and everything going on there. So with that being said, again, I know we're running a little over time, and I know a 2-hour time block is difficult for everybody. So I really, really appreciate all of our attendees for logging on. I want to give a huge round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so very much. And I know one of the questions that I had flagged that people have asked if this has been recorded, because they would love to watch it again, and they would love to send it to people that haven't heard. And yes, we do record it. We probably will not post them on our YouTube page until next month, because we like to get through all the live seminars first. But everybody will be, it would be advertised when we do post them on our YouTube page. So with that being said, Kyle, do you mind posting the survey link one more time so that everybody can just click on that link in the chat, take 3 to 5 minutes and fill out that survey for us. And I really, really appreciate everybody and everybody's time. So have a great night wherever you are from. And we thank you again for attending. And hopefully we'll see you next Wednesday.